It is good to be with you all this morning. I'm glad you all are here today. It is a good thing to get to be in your presence, to worship together with you all. In the heat of the summer like this, I'm reminded of a number of family vacations I took around this time of year. We took a lot of road trips in my family, and we had quite a routine as we would do these things, that when we'd pack into the car to go somewhere that we'd been planning for months, my mom would write these long packing lists for us to check off to make sure we had everything. And we'd have a routine of picking out snacks the week before and going through all of these little rituals to make sure that we were good for 8 hours in the road. My poor parents took us a lot of ways, a lot of directions, and I can't imagine the number of hours they spent in the car with us. They were very kind to do that. When I got a little bit older, there were a couple of summers while I was in seminary that I worked for an organization, and the job required me to drive a lot on my own. And I was driving through the mountains of Appalachia all by myself, usually in a really crummy old Ford Taurus, just doing my best with feeble air conditioning. But I developed a routine of my own. It wasn't quite as organized and detailed as my mother's were when we were kids growing up, but every journey that I went on, I sort of stumbled into a rhythm. I would map out the road. I'd make sure I had all of the navigation on my phone. I would get a couple of snacks for the road. I would look at music ahead of time and save things to my phone, because in the mountains you would always lose service, so you'd have to have everything saved. So I had playlists, and I had books to listen to sometimes. And if it was a really long trip, I would even map out the restaurants where I may stop for lunch and for breaks. As the summer went on, it was a beautiful thing to settle into this rhythm that made the journey that much more beautiful, that much more fruitful. I even noticed my first year working for this organization, I found myself being a lot more frazzled, a little bit more disorganized as I was getting my footing working for them. I was often, had trouble timing and building in enough time for traffic. I found myself kind of rushing around, running late. But the second year, I'd worked out a lot of the kinks. There was much more beauty on the road, with a much more peace of mind. I even made sure to build in time that I could pull off and look at every scenic overlook, so that the journey that I was on was that much more beautiful. There was much joy in the places where I arrived, but there was a lot that I gained from the journey itself. And in fact, the preparation that I did for the journey ended up having a great bearing on the experience that I had along the way. Ezra and the people of God who are traveling with him are traveling on a journey. And as they are headed from one place to the next, they take careful steps of preparation so that when they come to their destination, they will have had a fruitful and safe and protected experience. For those of you who may have missed it, for the last few weeks we've been studying the book of Ezra, which is meeting people right after a time of exile. Ezra and all of the Israelites are coming out of a time where they had been displaced from their homes, where they had been living under an oppressive military rule that made many of them experience poverty and violence and hunger, all sorts of loss. And they were ripped out of their homes and out of their culture. And one of the most significant things was that they were unable to worship in the ways that they were, the ways that they were accustomed to worshiping. So, on the other side of this exile, this group of people have to go through the process of rebuilding. They're rebuilding physically. At the beginning of the book of Ezra, we heard stories about the rebuilding of their temple, of the house of God, and the ways that God really provided for this rebuilding to happen. That resources and laborers came out of the woodworks so that the temple of God might be restored. This was the most important thing to happen first. They set worship ahead of all of the other priorities that they had. Now, though the people have a temple in which to worship, they still have a journey of spiritual rebuilding. For generations, for 70 years or more, all of these people have lost touch with their worship, lost touch with their spirituality, lost touch with all of their habits, their connection to God. And so, it will take some time and some effort for them to reorient themselves to God, to continue to build that relationship back up. So Ezra is the leader who is raised to do this work. He's raised up as a priest to help God's people. Now that their temple is built, his task is to help God's people to worship rightly. And so, that means that he has to travel from where he is up to Jerusalem. And he takes a crowd of people with them. And this is the story that we find out about in Ezra chapter 8, part of which was read today. That Ezra brings over 1,500 people on this journey to Jerusalem, this journey to rebuilding their faith, rebuilding their worship. And though their goal is to get back to the temple, the work of rebuilding and reconnecting their spirituality begins before they even leave. We know in the first few verses of this chapter, there's a long, long list of people who are included in this group who are going to be taking this trip with Ezra. And we know that they come from very prominent families. To list all of their names would be a real battle. But if you care to look, they're at the top of the chapter of Ezra chapter 8. What's most important to know is that these are people from noble families, people from prominent families of Israel's history. It is in their bloodline. It is their ancestors who are really faithful to God's work. And so it is descendants of those people who are invited on the journey, people whose ancestors were faithful to God, and then along the way they got mixed up and displaced and tossed all about in this exile. They're coming back together. It's a family reunion almost, that all of these people are coming back together, journeying along the way to return to Jerusalem. When Ezra examines this group, however, he comes to realize that there are hardly any priests among them. And the problem is that the work that they're going to do at the temple requires a lot of hands for a lot of priests. And so his first job in going to the temple for the journey is that he sends a group of leaders to another temple, asking to borrow some of their ministers so that they may come along with them on the journey, so that when they finally arrive in Jerusalem, they will have priests to help them with all of their holy work. So the first piece of Ezra's journey is figuring out who the capable leaders were in his group and delegating them this task, entrusting them with this job to go and find other leaders to help along the way. It says in chapter 18 that they find people to help them by the gracious hand of God, that God's hand was upon them, that God helped them to carry out the work that they were supposed to do. Then, as they were all ready and gathered to go, they were gathered at the river, and Ezra proclaimed a fast. They had a long way to go on their journey, and they had the potential of running into some troubling challenges. Not every person along this road might be safe. They would be going through some dangerous neighborhoods. They might encounter people who might rob them, people who might take advantage of them. There were dangerous things along the way. It's not quite like taking a road trip now in 2026. There were a lot of risks in traveling in a caravan like they did. And so, they had an option. They were told, Ezra was told, that he had the potential to take advantage of any of the armies of the king that might protect them along the way. But chapter 8, verse 22, Ezra says he was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers to protect against the enemy, because we told the king that the hand of our God was upon us. Ezra was setting this precedent, was sharing this value from the very beginning, that we are a group of people who trust in God. We put our faith in God to preserve us, to keep us safe. Ezra's concern was that he goes to the king and says, we really believe in this mission that we are on. We're going to the temple to worship our God, who is mighty and powerful and incredible and capable to save us. But just in case, maybe you could send some soldiers and some cavalry to protect us anyway. Ezra wanted to completely prove that God was with them, that God would protect them, that God was gracious to those who put their faith in him. And so, he proclaimed a fast for all of these people who are traveling as a way of showing that they were humble, that they were submitting themselves to God, that they were committed to the work that God was calling them to. And their prayer was that by showing themselves as committed to this work, God might keep them safe. This was their second preparation. They humbled themselves. They committed themselves to the mission that God had called them to. And they daily prayed for God's protection. Verse 23 says, we fasted and petitioned our God for this, and he listened to our entreaty. Fasting was their way of demonstrating that they were fully reliant on God, body and soul. All of us, it is easy for all of us to say that we are reliant on God, that we put our trust in God, that we pray to God, and we trust that God will take care of us. But fasting is one way of disciplining ourselves, that by experiencing just some bit of lack, some physical lack, for them they were fasting food. For us, we may fast a number of things. By experiencing a little bit of lack, it is our way of saying that we trust that God will take care of us. That as with each pang of hunger, we have an opportunity to look to God as the one who provides for us everything. Every gift of food, every gift of care and of safety ultimately comes from God. This was an opportunity for Ezra to stake his claim, to say, we are more reliant upon God than we are on the armies of the king. This is their way of communicating to the king where their allegiance lies. When we are faced with challenges, we have an opportunity to communicate the same thing. When the road ahead looks dangerous, when the journey is long, who do we choose to put our faith in? Is our knee-jerk reaction when faced with trial to turn to the old things that help us to feel like we're getting by? We're dependent on all kinds of things to help us get through the day, whether material things, whether it is our addiction to food or to drink or to gambling, whether it is an addiction to shopping or to gorging ourselves with desserts, whether it is our greed or our pride, whether we fall back on judgment and complaining and condemnation of our neighbors. When we are faced with challenges, we have an opportunity to decide, where are we going to put our faith? And it may be an easy way out to put our faith in things that give us instant gratification. But Ezra's example is in the face of a harrowing journey to place his faith in God and to demonstrate that not just with lip service, but by humbling and breaking his own body to communicate that truly he trusts that God would provide all that is needed. And God rewarded this fast. God saw Ezra in his faithfulness and kept him and all those journeying with him safe. Finally, over and over again in this book, we hear about the financial ways that these things are possible. It's happened in a few chapters that when they talked about building the temple, when they talked about all that was required to worship, they continue to share that part of the work of laboring as a worshiping people is managing money. This passage shares that there is silver and gold and bronze, all sorts of ways that they had wealth accumulated to do the work that they were to do. Some of this came through free will offerings. Some of it came through tithes. Some of it came from the governing bodies. But they were entrusted all of this, for lack of a better term, money. And the third preparation that Ezra made for the journey was to appoint people to manage this money that they had been given, to guard them and take care of them, make sure nothing was lost along the way. These gifts that they had been given for worship were precious and worthy of careful stewardship. We talk often about how the fact of donation, of giving to the church even, is an act of worship. We share that our tithes and our offerings are an act of worship because we know that all that we are given comes from God, and it is a beautiful thing that we can offer that back up to God. But this story takes it even one step further, which is to say that not only is the donation of goods an act of worship, but the stewardship is an act of worship as well. For these priests to care for these finances, to guard them well, to make sure that nothing was lost, so that they might steward these gifts well, that was an act of worship as well. This chapter closes by sharing that once all of these things had been prepared, once they had the right people, the right priests along for the journey, when they had laid their lives down in a fast, putting their trust in God to guide them along the way, and when they appointed people to care for the finances, then finally they were ready to go to Jerusalem. And they traveled for many days, and finally they came to Jerusalem. They had enough priests to do the work of the temple. They found that of the finances that they had stewarded and set aside, everything that was accounted for, that nothing was missing on the journey. And we know that they made it there safely because God saw their commitment, their daily fasting and praying, reliance upon God. And they made it safely and were able to continue their work of worship. The destination where they landed was important. They had great work to do once they arrived in Jerusalem. But their work of ministry did not begin at the destination, but it began before they even left. Their preparation for the journey was just as important. The preparation that we take for our journeys, whatever that may be for you, if it's looking up the maps on the road, or if it's finding music to listen to along the way, or mapping out where you might pick out food, all of these things prepare us to get to where we need to go well. And there are things that we might do on our journeys that can make the journey more pleasant. When we allow extra time to stop and take in the beauty at the scenic overlooks, the journey for us becomes a much more beautiful and enjoyable thing. And for Ezra and these Israelites, the work that they put in on the journey drew them nearer to God, prepared them for their ministry, and stood as a testament to all those who were looking in, to prove that God was faithful to protect them when they were faithful to seek God's care. May we remain rooted in this reality that wherever we are going, whatever journeys we are on in life, it is not about where we are trying to end up, but there is beauty and power in the preparation that we do along the way. We are made better for devoting ourselves to God, for making sure all of our accounts are in order, for preparing well, so that when we get to the places we are going, we're not starting from scratch, but we have drawn closer to God day by day. It is not about where we are going, but it is about how we get there and who we cling to along the way. Amen.